So, we got roll call. So, I'm here, Pete Colstead's here, Mimi's here, Jim Carter's here, Terry's here, Richard's here. Okay, Sabrina's here. Okay, also, let's see, Lee Wilcox is here. So, you're going to...
We just need to start holding meetings at 8, so we can...
Yeah. Is that
Please, like, yes, please.
Just sat at my desk, got a bunch of work done.
Good. There you go. Thank you for, seriously, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so, item is the memo, the city letter memo. What are we calling it? We're calling it a letter?
It's a letter.
Okay.
Letter.
And just for logistical, I need your signature so that I can...
Okay. And so, I think we're looking at this for the first time, so. So essentially, except for the letterhead and formatting a little bit, Sabrina, this is what I provided?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it is different.
Do you have an extra copy?
Get this?
I just embedded your references into
Yeah,
those.
the reason I did it that way, the way I did it was so that it didn't kind of clutter up the, it's awfully wordy when you
Are these extra?
do
Yes,
that.
they're extra.
Yeah, see, I did it this way.
I'm
And then
still looking
give
at
them a reference A, reference B, reference C, rather than have it all, because you leave a bunch of words in there.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, you're talking about the chart?
No, I'm talking about, my format was, I pulled everything out and called it reference A, B, C, so that it's not embedded, so that you're not reading, because that was one of the issues we had with the plan.
Yeah.
It was all wordy in the plan.
Repetitive.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's it. The main part of this is the items that we need, or we agreed, and second page at the bottom, we agreed that this is what we need. We okay with that? Everybody okay with that?
So I think what you're saying is that we're kind of stuck until we find out who the auditor is, what's going on with the auditor, because we don't know what they're producing for our process.
Plus, we need to establish a line of communication with that auditor so that we know what we're going to get from the auditor, so when we make our report, we know how to plug it in.
Can I ask, where in the language does it say that the independent oversight group will work directly with an independent auditor?
It doesn't.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think you guys are just arriving at that conclusion. What usually happens, and, possibly on our end for not explaining it, but any money that comes into the city, in addition to it being audited by our budget department and then finance department, because of our size in most cities, have independent audits of revenues coming in and how they're dispersed to make sure that they're done appropriately. And that's, I forget what the report is called, but it's something that comes to council once or twice a year. And it's just, like with this, it's very simple because it's general fund money like we've talked about, so technically the council could spend it on anything, but it does look at fees or, revenues that are coming into a fund, making sure it's spent on that money. So that is something that an independent auditor would do. I don't believe you would have interaction with that auditor. There's actually very strict limits of how that auditor works within the city. They're actually required by charter to meet with the mayor once a year, which I used to do as with him as the budget director. So I don't believe there'd be a lot of action between like this group, Neighborhoods Commission, and that auditor. I think what we had talked about is kind of like that report card or kind of that matrix we were talking about. Staff would do that and then bring that to you guys.
Okay.
As part of like the adopted budget process.
And let me jump in. This is my opinion. We're not questioning or challenging what the data is going to come in. Okay. What we'd like to know is what is the data coming in what format. we're using that matrix, that's kind of like our course roadmap,
Yep.
okay? I kind of likened it, and this is, and I don't want to go into that much detail, but our city auditor publishes an annual report.
Correct.
Okay, in that report's compiled from a lot of data, a lot of raw data comes in, numbers, okay. And then it's extracted and it's summarized in some of its graphical form, and it's very simplified, and it doesn't get into weeds. Here's what was provided, and we can show trends. For example, we want to show maybe 5 to 6 years how money was spent and all that. Well, that's shown ideally in a graphic. You can show that. Here's how money was spent, what areas, okay. And then some of the other data that'll come back. I want to hit you with my arm over here. Some of the other data coming in to show it simply and in a simple report. That's why I say we need to know kind of what information is going to be provided to us, so that at the last minute we're not getting a data dump and then we're trying to run through a whole bunch of data and seeing how we're going to present it in a format that goes out to whoever's going to be reading it. I'm looking at the reader who's going to receive this, okay, and it's more than the city council and the city manager, okay? Someone's going to want to say, well, where'd the Measure B money go? How was it spent? And it'd be nice to produce a report that was readable and understandable by a person who had no contact with this. Okay, they could pick that up. Oh, here's what Measure B said. Here's what the goal of Measure B was. Here's what was appropriated and here's what was expended, and here's the results we got from that money that was spent. That's ideal. That's my ideal. I don't know about anybody, the rest of you folks here. Okay? So there's no conflict here about, challenging input we're going to get from them. We just want to know I want to know what information we're going to get so that I can put it in a format that can be presented and understood by people to be read.
Yeah, so based off the last time I was here in November, I thought I was pretty clear, there's no way we're just going to hand you a pile of data and have you have to go through it and figure out what it looks like. That's kind of the purpose of the matrix when we talked about it, which is going to look sort of similar to that. There's some changes being made to it as of 45 minutes ago with the budget office and I. So that it's very digestible for you guys and clear on, here's what the city committed to in the first year and told the voters, and here's the ebb and flow from year to year. Just the brownouts. Yeah, we're back in brownouts because the city had a deficit and we took $6 million out of the fire budget. So we would provide you information in there so you could see how it was tracking. Again, honestly, on the report, this is for you guys to decide how you disseminate that information and how you report out on it.
So essentially, we'd be getting a similar document like this?
Yeah, it's going to change. Sabrina and I played with it a little bit, and then Jim Shannon, the assistant budget director, and I kind of played with it a little bit.
Because what Gary's asking is what type of format, how are we going to receive, we don't know what.
Yeah, so in my view, when we talked about in November, so we weren't putting you guys in a situation where there is data, and you don't have to be Sharon Erickson, the city auditor, who has a huge, very talented staff that can, have an Excel sheet that's, as big as the city and figure out the cool graphics. Was for us to take the burden of producing something like that on a matrix, so it's very readable, that you don't need to search for, oh, wait a minute, the city is cutting this, or the city is increasing this. We will come and tell you what we're doing as a part of the proposed budget.
I think one of our key concerns was when do we get to digest this information, and is it going to be done in a timely manner? Because we feel that we've committed to providing a report back, and we want to be able to keep our promise, and what we committed to. So I think our concern is like the timeline and when the information is going to be given to us, so that we can digest it and produce a report back saying,
So
we're in agreement.
So what I just looking at this, what I remember is from our November meeting is we were going to take a shot at kind of the style and the look of the matrix and bring it back in the new year with hopefully the prior year's information in there, so you could see,
Right.
okay, this is what we're going to expect to see, so that it was built. So I think we're close to that. I think we could easily have something before, the 7th of February. I will say, like I said before, though, the budget process is kind of constrained and happened really fast. So this May 2nd date, the final annual report to Neighborhoods Commission, what's that? In this?
Hold on a second. Where are we? May 2nd.
That's this group, the ICOC, going to the full commission with what our findings are, so the commission can publish it.
So May 2nd would be for the ICOC to finalize the report with all the
Okay.
information, so that it can be submitted to go May 9th in front of the whole commission, so that it can be submitted prior to
Got
June.
it. Yeah, so I think this is where, the proposed budget comes out May 1st. So you're likely to see it on May 1st, just as the mayor and council. So we will need to figure out whether you have a special meeting or how we work that through. And if there's a special, meeting for Neighborhoods Commission, because we can't legally release the proposed budget, before May 1 or before mayor and council has it. So we wouldn't be able to come to you with that information until then, but, I'm happy to have a special meeting or, have Neighborhoods Commission have a special meeting to make that timeline. We're asking you to do something that kind of lives and breathes with like an existing cycle. So if we need to augment to do that, we can do that, but I can't augment the budget cycle.
But our role, and this is, I think, my biggest confusion on this, our role is past tense. We're not really working on the next budget. We're reporting to the voters on the results of their vote on Measure B, and basically, was the money spent in kind of what
Correct.
people thought it would be?
Yeah, I mean,
So
we
we
have
don't
to
need
come
to
to you
know
as-
the new. Why do we care what is in the new budget? I mean,
Yeah.
we care,
Right.
and it might inform us a little bit, but our actual
Oh, so
work
I see
product-
what you're saying. So,
We're history.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I had never
We're-
thought
we're
about it that
history.
way.
We're history.
We're
So
working on
it's-
2016, we're
Right.
MBA 14, that's what our job right now is.
Okay, so
Look at
let's
it-
just take this year. So basically, I see what you're saying. I always kind of, when we talked about it, you guys kind of saying, hey, the way they've proposed it is the way they said they would propose it, and so we're supportive of it. But what you're saying is you don't need to live and breathe in that cycle. You can be retrospective. So right now we could be looking at last year's budget, and you guys telling someone,
Yeah.
yes, they spent the right way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, get it.
Okay?
And that way,
Are
when
we
the new
wrong?
budget comes out,
It seems what the job is.
and then when you got the new budget coming out, you've got our approval for the previous, so.
We can do that?
Isn't that what we've been doing all along? I mean, we've
No,
never
I
had a
mean, so
job description. Yeah.
technically, I'd have to look at the past two MBAs, but your previous MBAs, and quite frankly, I can, whether it was
That's
last year or the year
interesting.
before, but the letter you guys wrote in an MBA fashion to the mayor, I took that and created Beautify SJ with Sam. Like that was you guys proactively saying, hey, here's a need here, and us saying, okay, let's figure out how to do this in the budget. So some of your MBAs over the past few years have been more about the proposed budget versus looking
Oh, yeah,
backwards.
right,
Yeah,
sure.
But for this
Absolutely.
exercise, I'm
Yeah,
fine
yeah.
looking backwards. We can, I mean,
So my understanding is the commission is taking, they're
Yeah, and being
separating
presented
out
in the matrix,
two
absolutely.
pieces, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's an oversight committee, meaning we're seeing where it went.
We're past tense.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
past tense, and once again,
Okay.
it's
We may,
Go to the
looking
T.
at-
That was perfect. I
it's-
wasn't thinking about it
it's
that
looking
way.
at data that's happened.
we may need to have that special
And-
meeting
and-
for the budget
Yeah, for the if you-
MBA, which
Right.
is a different
which is a
Yes.
different thing.
thing,
Right,
Yes.
Got it.
but
Okay.
not for this.
We can do that.
okay. Because last time this matrix was adjusted, and we had prior years before. Because one of the things we want to look at, money being fungible, okay, we're going to take $17 million on street repair. Did that come out of the Measure B funds? But $17 million disappeared from somewhere else. So we want to look at how much was spent on street repairs last year, how much was spent on it, and it ought to add up to at least 17 million more. So
Yeah.
does it seem like a reasonable number, or was
Yeah.
the money moved around in a funny way? We're not accusing or whatever, but that is, I think, what we see our responsibility as, is this was kind of the promise, okay?
Yeah.
Did they fulfill the promise?
Yeah. Okay.
And then
that's easy.
ideally, once again, going back to the city auditor, okay, and how she does things, which, over the years, I'm really, impressed with what she does with that
She's
amount.
amazing.
No, really, I mean, it's not, because it's understandable. And I was in that work of presenting data to people to make it understandable, okay?
Yeah.
This matrix is kind of like the root of that.
Yeah.
And then the findings, when we got to that findings section of the report, would extract that stuff and maybe have a couple of graphics in there, once again, supporting that. Here's the finding, for police or something like that. Here's that particular transportation, street repair. You have few words and graphics showing street repair maybe over the years or something like that. And I'd kind of like to talk to her when I see that, so maybe I get some ideas from her or something like that, how we can present that, you know what I mean?
I don't know that I see that as our complete part here, I mean, we're not, again, analyzing this data. I'm not so sure our report at the end doesn't say, yes, they complied, no, they didn't comply. Adding a bunch of other stuff over the top of it, that's not our job. That's their job, so.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, we do want to have a little explanatory material, but our job is thumbs up, thumbs down.
Okay.
They lied to you.
I
or
think
it was
so,
good
I think
news.
so.
They like you.
Sabrina's a crook.
Could we not put my name
Well, I don't
in the report anyway, please?
It'd go a lot higher, I think, but it's okay.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's what we, as an independent oversight, I mean, we're asking the question, did they comply or didn't they comply?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's all we're trying to get to.
That is.
And if you're going to present us this format of data, we're already going to have that to tag to the report. Here's what the process was. Here's what they provided us. Here was our finding. It might be findings, but I don't know if there's a graphic or anything attached to it necessarily. I mean, I don't need a graphic.
Yeah, and I mean, legally, you guys are required to do this or this, not do anything extra, and I totally appreciate the ambition of trying to create something like that, but I can tell you, I mean, having done it a lot and working with Sharon on her specifically, it does take a lot of time, and just judging by seeing a little bit of the discussion on your work plan and everything else, you guys have a pretty ambitious agenda already, so.
I guess the only question I kind of wonder about is, so let's say we open it up and there is a conflict. Again, really all we're saying is, no, they did not comply.
In our view.
Yeah,
We're really not analyzing why it didn't comply or what didn't happen.
I don't know.
Right.
And if there's 8 items, we're saying, 6 of them complied and 2 didn't, or whatever, and that would be the data that would come back out.
Well, we might want to report the reasons why they didn't comply. So, we were going to do improved fire,
Clearly,
whatever, and, I'm sorry, the flood happened and we had to steal the money to do it.
yeah, right.
I mean, there are going to be legitimate needs for money that weren't anticipated, and it's not our job to say that was good or bad, but it is our job to say, did the money get spent in the street repairs as quote promised?
Yeah.
And that's all we have to do, right?
Speaking of the promises, is the money that's being used for this, can it go to anything that the city deems necessary for it to go to?
So it's
Whether it's homelessness
so
or-
it's a general tax. So legally, the council can spend it on any general fund expenditure. But what they committed to during the voters was that MBA 14, like here's what we're committing the money to on an ongoing basis, and they were
It's such
kind of like unlike a traditional campaign where there was just a little bit of mail or whatever. That MBA 14 kind of really took a central theme and kind of what voters should expect.
So
And when they placed the sales tax on the ballot too, I will say, which was the first week of March that year, there was additional online budget games to help kind of fill out what that list would be as well. So that's where it was kind of born. But I think that's the part for some of the oversight.
So the one item, and Terry stepped out here, but I think the one item that needs to get resolved is the last item on this memo.
$2 million almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
The bottom, the chart on the wall.
Oh, the rapid rehousing?
Yeah,
Oh, the-
No,
reduce
no,
homelessness.
reduce-
Yeah, so it went to the rapid rehousing program,
Uh-huh.
specifically, yes.
Is that a new matrix?
No, it's the old one.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
We just can't see it.
no.
I can't see it.
From here.
Oh, I see, rapid, yeah, rapid redundancy.
So money can be rerouted to be used for that.
So that
Anything.
specific.
Yeah, well, it was in the original MBA
It was?
that we would spend it on,
It
and
was in the
yes.
MBA, it wasn't in the original
It was 2 million in the
ballot.
first year and then 4 million on an ongoing.
Yeah, but
So it
that's
wasn't in
not
the
part of
original
Measure
ballot?
B.
It was,
What?
well, in the original ballot language, it called out everything else on this matrix, actually, as a category, and then said, or other, whatever, there was some language around, or other expenditures, or whatever.
No, services such as,
Cer-
and then
that's it,
enumerated. yeah.
Such as,
Yeah.
and it enumerated some of these such
Yeah,
ases,
Yeah.
but it didn't
So it
enumerate
could be
all
that-
of the such ases.
No, but
So legally,
So legally, it's fine, but that
I don't mind.
does
Legally,
not
it's-
necessarily
legally,
mean
so-
a resident reading it without that understanding.
yes,
That's,
that's where.
So I will say-
Yeah, but, you know, and I'll go back to my interviewing people, talking to people informally, without, you know, and showing them or asking them if they remember Measure B. Some of them now do, you know, don't because it's a couple of years. And I show them the actual Measure B, and they, oh yeah, I remember this. Did you vote for it? Yeah, I voted for it. And I said, we go over that, and then I mentioned homelessness. Well, homelessness is not in there. Okay? And that's almost universal. I have yet to find anybody that said, well, you know, the homeless isn't in there.
Interesting, okay.
And most people voted for that, including myself, because of the oversight. Because they had reluctance, because every time you pass a measure, the money goes somewhere and things don't get done.
Yeah. So, Sabrina's right. Legally, the council and the city can do this.
Yeah.
I'll say I still think it's appropriate. You know, having been a part of the sales tax campaign, the reason the word homelessness isn't in there is because of a word limit, quite frankly, more than anything. And there was very robust public discussion around, you know, tying safety and homelessness together and the rapid rehousing kind of program being part of it. And so that's, you know, because you're limited in a ballot statement, and I think one of the ballot arguments or the opposition actually speaks to homelessness if it's not in the, because I know it's not an actual ballot statement. But that's why MBA 14 was kind of created to help further clarify some of what, you know, voters would, you know, suspect, and obviously not every single voter saw MBA 14 that saw the ballot statement. But again, as a group, this is, you know, an area where you could say, hey, you know, 36 million of this is being spent, you know, as you see fit, but 4 million is going to this other thing.
That's the findings.
Yeah,
That's
and
the
then
findings.
you can
Report on
absolutely
findings.
say that if you
That's
want. But I do think as you guys get closer to that, I would come back, and Sabrina would come back, and I think pull out some of the ballot arguments. Which did you sign one of those?
Right.
You ended up signing one, didn't you? Yeah.
They're,
Because
they're
I-
online, they're still
Yeah,
available.
there's it's either the first argument for, or the response to the first argument against spoke to homelessness. But you know, that's
Yeah,
a
there's
decision for you
nothing
guys to make.
wrong with homeless, I mean, addressing this issue and funding and putting resources to address that problem. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just looking at, you know, stovepipe, this kind of perspective on this thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to reading words specifically and parsing them, you know, and that, you know, that didn't appear in the language of the
Yeah.
measure.
Well, I mean, on all your other bullet points, I think there were kind of, well, a little bit of us communicating on some of the proactive versus kind of retroactive stuff that we're going to be looking at. The last bullet point here is something you guys need to decide when the matrix comes forward, right? So, you know, talking to the city manager now or anyone else about it, wait until you get the data and, you know, look at the ballot statements and arguments in opposition to before you make that decision, because it's nothing to debate now since we haven't actually come
One of
forward
our
with it.
findings, right?
Yeah.
Money was spent in homeless, and that wasn't on the thing, and that's what we found.
It was in the
Now, are we
ballot
presenting
language, however, it
are we going to be
wasn't.
presenting our findings to council, or are we just turning in a piece of paper?
We're gonna publish a report that goes to, my understanding, it would go to the mayor, council, and the city manager. We are an independent.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's going to be some type of independent report or go through the neighborhood commission, kind of like report out. I think that's
So
what
go through, the
It'll probably
neighborhood
be an
commission
MBA.
will review it, but I mean,
Maybe it has to be an
it's
MBA.
our report. was out.
No, the MPA is about the.
And maybe it's just my pessimism, but I'm just hoping it, like,
Maybe it would just be a report.
it's gonna be put on the top of a,
We could put it,
my point, I just was, a little pessimism is just as far as that report actually being seen.
in red.
Yeah, no, I
read.
mean, the intent isn't to bury it.
Yeah.
The form that it takes and the timing is up for discussion. I mean, we're open to that.
So if the issue's a letter, I think we remove the top 6 bullet items, the needed information. So who is the auditor, we don't care. Basically, it gets down to what information is going to be provided for us
And when?
and when.
So when does this group meet again?
February, the first Wednesday in February.
February. So
Unless-
I would suggest, unless you guys feel you need to send something to Dave, if it's the budget office looking back, like in the budget that we're in, and pulling this information together, I don't see why there's a reason that we don't have a really significant draft or final draft for you at that meeting
Okay.
for them to work. So if you don't get it, then send this letter. But I'm pretty sure, if it's the February 7th, that we'll have something in shape for you guys to see.
Can we get it a week ahead of time?
Yeah, the
The
sooner
agenda
the better.
packet so we can vote on it.
Yeah, because at the meeting, it'd be nice
End of
to,
the
It's a standing
it'd be nice to
meeting
act
instead of
on it.
ad hoc, or a standing committee.
Right.
Okay.
But
So
it
it's
would
a
be
standing
nice.
committee, that means I have to follow all the Brown Act rules, which
Right.
means it has to be posted 7 days ahead of time.
God, it's the
It's
worst.
a pain.
Supposed to say it.
There was an article in the Chronicle some time ago, I gave it to Sabrina, about how the Brown Act needs to be updated for today's.
Or the people that put it on local government should follow it themselves.
Well, not necessarily, but I mean, it was good, no, but it was
I feel
essentially when it
I
was
think
written.
they should.
My first job out of college, I worked in the state legislature, and if anything ever started to go sideways, someone yelled caucus. People went in their respective wings of the Capitol, and you came back out, and it was a quick vote. And so, obviously, the business isn't being done in public there. So.
Nope.
But, no, anyway, it was.
That's why we need it in advance.
Yeah, I'm sure we can meet it in advance.
Well, like I said, it would be
We
nice
did,
at the
what Doug
meeting.
gives
we
us like a
can-
week or two to really do it. So yeah, just
But I mean, at the meeting, it'd be nice to have had it, so that we can,
Yeah.
we're not looking at it for the first time.
yep. I think we can get you something 10 days in advance.
So then we have a commitment for it to be to us a week in advance from our next ad hoc meeting,
It's the end of
so
the
that
month.
we can
Standing
review it,
committee.
I'm sorry, standing committee, so that we can review it, and we will withhold sending this letter out. Any then?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't get the information, send the letter out. But then if you do get it, I think this last bullet here you guys are talking about, that becomes part of the letter and the report to the mayor and council, really.
Okay.
Can I throw one other item on the table? So that we're working off MBA 14, which was fiscal year 16, 17.
Yes.
Where's MBA 15 for 17, 18?
For
Where's the
Looking
plan
at the-
for spending the sales tax revenues for
For
the current
this current.
budget year?
yeah, so and we talked a little bit about this. So the city has what we call like an incremental budget. We oddly enough the big huge binders only talk about the changes. So once something's in the base budget, it's assumed year after year. So there's no new MBA on what we're doing with the 40 million, because in that MBA we spoke about how we were going to spend that 40 million on an ongoing basis.
So these
So-
numbers will be tweaked each year?
So basically what we'll do is, and I think this is where, the budget office and myself ran into some trouble a little bit, is we want to be able to look at, just as an example, because it's up on the wall, expand police recruitment. It just went away. It was $1.5 million.
There we go.
So looking at last year's budget, there's no MBA to look at. What I do is I look at the budget with the budget office and see, did we change the budget to recruit officers? And if we did, there has to be something in the budget. But if it's just small incremental growth, like the rest of the budget, 2% or whatever, we don't speak about it. So then I know, okay, it's staying the same, and I just have to pull out what it is. So there's no new MBA, but, and that's where kind of the work takes place, because it's hard to go through the base budget and pull things out, and that was going to be the time crunch. But again, if we're not talking about 18, 19, and we're looking back on 17, 18 right now, there's be a little bit of a time crunch right now, because we want to get it to you guys for February, but, this can be something that we bring to you in the fall, if we're looking backwards. in the future. This isn't hard.
Yeah, it should be, once the budget's
Okay,
over,
so-
your
so
analysis
our-
is done, boom, here's the number.
Our task for what we're doing now will be for FY 17-18.
Yes.
No, it'll be for
16,
16, 17,
yeah.
and 17, 18?
No, 16,
No, it's
Or
17.
16, 17? Okay.
16, 17?
Right,
No,
16.
because 17,
17,
18
Well,
is
so
right
we're,
now.
we're in seven,
So,
well, no,
yeah.
and we're in 17, 18
Okay,
right
so
now, so
16,
technically you
17.
should do both, since we didn't do one in the first year.
No, because we're
But they
not
can do another
prospective.
one in the fall, is what I'm
No,
saying.
We
you're,
can't give
you're
you
not
our
prospective, so
opinion.
like right now, we're starting to plan for 18, 19.
Right.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to meet a target for you guys. We're in 17, 18 right now, so like, the data's there. We can tell you, and you can say, of the current year in here, council's spending the money appropriately.
Well,
That's not hard to do.
Can you guys change, I mean, with these last couple months though, can that money go to different needs as seen
fall.
in the last couple months?
No, once it's appropriated, it's appropriated.
So if some big event happened,
Definitively.
I mean, I guess we do have a mid-year budget action where things can happen. So council could change it, but I will say even like with the flood last year, that didn't happen with this money.
okay.
So,
Okay, but for this year, we're looking at 16, 17. Was the money spent, were the promises of MBA 14 met? Is kind of a crude way to put it, but that's kind of what our job is
so here's the
right
thing.
now.
So we can go back and do both years. Technically 16, 17, you guys wrote an MBA to council saying,
You guys
yeah.
wrote it.
well, someone wrote it and it said,
Did he
you know,
say MBA
hey, we
14?
haven't really seen the
Yeah.
data that much. We know this is our responsibility and, you know, we look forward to it.
Oh,
So, like, technically, legally, you probably complied with 16, 17 already. If this was a normal year and we'd already done the exercise, we would be looking at 17, 18, the year that we're in right now.
Right.
So, why don't we see how hard it is to get the 17, 18 data in the 2 weeks to meet kind of your week timeline? But at some point in time, we should go back and fill in the 16, 17 as well, so the matrix is all there.
Okay.
All right, so
should we
this
do 16,
report,
17 first? That's one, we
yeah,
have
why
numbers
don't we
for
have,
16, 17.
why don't we do 16, 17, and then we've got a model,
Yes.
okay, that we can, and then putting it into the next one, 17, 18, be a lot easier.
And we
Okay.
could do, you guys could do both in one calendar year. You could do 16, 17 prior to the end of the fiscal year.
Just for this one
For
time,
the
since we
last
didn't
year,
do it
right.
previously.
Right.
And you're setting,
But
you're
that'll
setting
give
the
us-
basis, blah, 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 and then in the fall, it'll be really easy to
But
look
that'll
at
give
what
us a
just finished
prototype.
with the budget
We can-
to
we can
produce the next one.
Get it done, and then the following one, you know, it's just gonna update. It'll be an
It'll
update.
be much easier
And it'll be
this
invented.
round.
Yep.
Okay, right now, we're inventing it for the first time.
Yep.
So getting that 16, 17 numbers, especially if they're available, I think that would.
And we know the 16, 17 is lower than the 17, 18 because it was only for a partial year, right?
Correct, yeah, there's only 30 million collected.
Right. So it is partial. It's
Yep.
not a whole thing. Too bad it wasn't, because then we could use those figures to compare, in comparison next year.
And that's the other thing in the matrix, we need to show you, you know, what our revenue was in the year as well. Because, you know, like let's, you know, just for the keeping consistent, expand police recruitment, let's say it went to 0.
Yes.
But if the sales tax went down by $2 million, and we also were able to tell you, oh, we finally have 1,109 officers, you guys, okay, well, they didn't do this, but, you know, here's why, it's a finding. So we need to be better with kind of explaining what the projected revenue is in that year.
That's what I wanted, that's what I'm getting at. Right,
And
yeah,
that's,
what I wanna do.
that's a lot easier to do if we're talking about the current year and looking back, not trying to have you guys influence
I
like,
think
the
once we
proposed
get
budget
that,
process.
once we get that
Yeah.
one invented, I think after that we'll be,
Agreed.
we'll be in better shape. So, everybody,
Yeah,
okay?
I'm agreeing with
Yes.
you.
We're gonna hold off on the,
The letter from
okay, and we're also gonna schedule, so the next meeting that if you attend, it's gonna be at 8 o'clock.
Okay. That's great.
No,
Sabrina,
it's
just put it on my
not.
calendar.
It's at 6.
I was just telling Sabrina
I'm gonna have a
I was just
heart
telling
attack if we're
Sabrina
doing
actually
like
with the new
8.
job, I'm in so many meetings, I'm not finding time to actually do work. So, like my last meeting was at 5, and I was like, oh my god, I got 3 hours to like actually cross stuff off the to-do list. So,
But thank you, no, seriously, thank you.
Oh, yeah, no, no,
I
it's
you know,
Thank you for
I
coming out.
appreciate it, yeah.
Can I suggest that for that February 2nd meeting, though, that we redo this? To get rid of the superfluous
February
questions about the
7th
thing?
meeting.
Well,
Seventh,
Yeah.
yes. And I'd like to reformat this chart so it's easier to read. and everything.
Well, it should all be on one page.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would have been if I
Well,
wasn't
it's
just.
Yeah, just a little bit of fiddling, but get down and maybe even
If I
focus
just
a
do it
little bit
today,
on what we
it would
learned
be
tonight.
good if you
Sure.
So just tweak it based on
Well,
what we learned.
who's gonna tweak it?
I'll tweak it. if
Tweak
you
it.
want to send me.
Tweak
Okay.
it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'll send it to you because I have the version,
Yeah,
this
okay.
version.
Yeah,
But I still need
yeah.
you to sign, just give me, like, you can sign my version so I can screen
what-
capture it and pull it out and use it in the future.
But we're, okay, but we're not, okay.
But not for this one.
We're not-
I'm just saying you might as well give it to me now because we're talking about
Sure,
it, like letters.
So you'll squirt me that, okay.
Yeah,
I'll
I'll
turn
send
around
it.
right away. Yeah.
Okay,
Copy.
are we done?
Yeah, we'll copy.
We're done.
You done?
All right.
Thanks for
time is
being
it?
here,
What time
lady.
is it?
Cleared up? Yeah.
8:56.
8:55.
Hey.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
8:56,
Yeah, thank you.
according to this box in front of me.